more or less fine to start now. It might not be a long meeting, perhaps just reporting on where we are and what are the challenges that we're facing, and perhaps some updates from clients. We are now syncing 2 client DevNet on Kurtosis. This is Prism and Teku. We see that we can actually sync on top of each other's block. We can fork into ePBS without problems, but then soon afterwards we start forking, start reorging our own blocks, and it seems there's some problems at gossiping of execution payloads. We have implemented RPC requests and a bunch of other things, and have been improving quite fast. So, I mean, all of you know that once we start iterating with a different client, the pace starts picking up. Actually, in fact, I have now a DevNet running, which I should have stopped. Let me just stop it. All right, so some comments of the things that appeared from diagnosing this with Teku. So just to make it officially, we agreed on adding the slot to the payload envelope and removing the payload withheld from the payload envelope. So that was a message that became useless once we switched to Francesco's fork choice. And we decided just to remove it once we changed the structure to add the slot. I will open a CL spec PR with these changes. I'm not sure how painful it's going to be to fix the current states, the current tests. I suspect it's not so bad. So for advice, if any client is here trying to build on this and sync, there's a couple of things that are essentially required. Otherwise, it's impossible to sync, which is a client should be able to sync a block for which it hasn't seen one of the 2 parents. That means if you receive a block, so currently we all have paths for when the parent block root is not known, we verify the signature, we save the block, and we call by RPC, we request the parent block. So this becomes harder with the ePBS because you might have the parent block, but you may not have the parent block hash. So now there's 2 different parents. You have the parent block and the parent block hash, and you need both to sync a block. So it may be that you find yourself in a situation, that's what's happening now because we're not receiving the payloads, in which you have the parent block root, but you do not have the parent block hash. And you need to implement an RPC request so to get that payload envelope, to process that envelope immediately so that you can actually sync your block. And the same thing happens for payloads. It's quite common when you're running a Kurtosis on your own machine that you will receive the payload earlier than the block. So that means that you're receiving a payload for which you have the parent block hash now. So this is the opposite with blocks. You have the parent block hash because the parent block hash is from a previous block, but you do not have the parent block root, which is for the current slot. So in that case, you need to request the block by root, sync the block, and then you can sync the payload. So these 2 things were things that we hadn't implemented when we had that finalizing DevNet pre-DevCon on Prism, and we were forced to implement to sync Teku's blocks. What else? We added the slot. I already covered this. Oh, I see. So another thing that is currently not covered in the spec is what happens when you're syncing a block that reorgs the fork block. So that happens quite often. And well, that used to happen quite often. So if you're syncing a block whose parent block is from the previous block, from the previous fork, you need to declare that parent block as full, and you need to treat it as a full block. That is, any block pre-ePBS is a full block. It has both the block and the payload. And this was a source of bugs for Prisms. So I assume that this may be a source of bug for other clients as well. The final one that I wanted to discuss is we had some PRs open so both Enrico and Stefan opened PRs for to add payload envelopes by range requests on the P2P side and Beacon APIs for payload envelopes. Both of them request the payload envelope by the block root, and I wonder if we shouldn't request them by block hash. The reason being, I suspect that block hash might be better, and even to store in your DB might be better to store them by block hash instead of block root. And it's because it's typically easier to get the block root when you have a payload. You have the block root because you have an envelope, and the envelope shows the block root, than to get a block hash. So oftentimes, to get a block hash, you need to first get the block to read the header, and then read the hash to see what hash should have corresponded to that block root. So I think to avoid this lookup for the block, it might be better to store everything that is payload based in terms of block hashes instead of block roots. Well, that's about it. That's the situation we are now. We are having some issues in the DevNet because we are reorging each other after some blocks. We don't understand what's going on. We start the fork, we sync for a while, and then after a while, payloads start disappearing for some reason. So that's a peering issue surely, and we need to just check on peering. All right, so that's all my update. I'm not sure if Stefan wanted to add something.
I think you pretty much covered everything for this. Apart from that, yeah, I'm going to start adding some more P2P logging to see what potentially is going wrong when we send the payload. Yeah, other than that, not much else from me.
All right, so is there any other comment from anyone else? I was hoping that we will have this finalizing today, well, yesterday, and I was hoping that the RPC would just solve all of the issues, but it didn't. It also shows one of the reasons to have these DevNets early was to prove one of my biggest fear was that we couldn't handle the slot time. And we can in the happy case, but it seems that it's tricky when you're syncing a block for which you hadn't seen a payload, because you need to request the payload, sync it immediately, and then sync the block. And this I think it's what this DevNet is showing is that it's very tight. So I think we're going to do this preemptively, like Teco is suggesting. Teco is suggesting to request a payload if you haven't seen it in a while. This is something that is interesting because in the current Beacon chain, you cannot request a block when you haven't seen it by 4 seconds because you don't have a block route to request it. And we don't request blocks by slots. But in ePBS, if you haven't seen the payload by a certain time, you can actually request the payload because you have the route. And you even have the hash because it's committed already in the Beacon block. So I think it's a good idea. We should experiment with this, of start sending early RPC requests for payloads that we haven't seen. I'll implement this and see if this saves the DevNet. But also it's because I think it's going to be impossible to sync a block for which we haven't seen the payload earlier and build on top of that. I think the timelines of the slot, the attestation deadline being at 3 seconds forces us to request preemptively the payload, and we should think about these things. I don't know. So Enrico is here. Terence, do you guys have some comments?
No comments. I guess what we need to work on next from the client code perspective, it's probably payload by range implementation, such that we can test syncing from Genesis, right? Besides that, are there still any high value tests or low hanging fruit that you can think of?
So the DevNet showed that we can actually sync blocks without payloads, which is great because that is the biggest change. that you can actually reorder the payload. So that I think is already covered, but I'm pretty sure that for choice is completely broken, because I know that Prism will not survive even in the second epoch now. So like if we fork into ePBS, only a Prism DevNet now with all the new changes will have a problems in for choice and will start reorging itself in the second epoch of ePBS. So I want first to solve the issues that we have with Teku, then for choice at the next epoch, then have this finalizing. And after we have this finalizing, I will start worrying about syncing. I think Enrico's PR is fine, the one for payload by range. We need to like also change our state generation so that, I mean, the state replayer, so that it includes the payloads. That's a bit of a change. Besides that, I'm not sure.
When do you slide in Francesco's for choice implementation in this like roadmap?
So Francesco's for choice implementation, if we don't implement inclusion lists and we don't and we are still based on top of Electra instead of PRDAS, it's essentially nothing. It's no changes to for choice besides what we've already done, which is dealing with blocks that don't have a payload. So
you also need to count. You also have to count attestation, which we don't have.
Yes,
today.
but I think I think for a long time we can continue just ignoring PTC attestations.
I see.
Because they won't change the honest behavior of clients. If you see a payload, just build on top of it. If you don't see the payload, just don't build on top of it. I think this is very minor to add it or not. I will add that, and people are requesting this on Discord. I will add that CL spec moving into Francesco's for choice, but I stress Francesco's news. So for choice without inclusion list and without PRDAS, it's no changes, because you don't need to enforce PTC, because the PTC is not telling anything about GA and it's not telling anything about IL satisfaction. With Fossil and with PRDAS, then for choice changes, because then you need to actually enforce the vote of the PTC, because you cannot have validated DA unless you're a supernode, and you cannot, and there's some reasons, there's some other things about the inclusion lists. But without PRDAS, the PTC is kind of irrelevant for these DevNets.
So it might be worth it just to update the spec so we can just see how simple it is. So that like, yeah, I guess the Discord, the feedback was 24 choice complexity, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, if you open the spec, maybe that, I think it'll be easy to see how simple that is.
Yeah, it's at this point, it's really a matter of bandwidth. I have been essentially like probably 20 hours a day here, and I'm not going to spend them on Python until I have the Go code complete.
Yeah, that makes sense. Besides Teku and Prism, do we know if any other client teams are working on ePBS? Perhaps I can ask that on Discord. Because I mean, I'm sure there are EPF like fellows that will be interested in working, and I sounds like Nimbus, Lodestar, and Nimba, Lodestar, and Lighthouse may need help here. Anyway, okay, that's it for me.
So Dustin said that there are some people working in Nimbus. I'm not really sure how far that's going, but apparently there are people working on Nimbus. All right, so we can close. I was hoping to have this finalizing by now, but it's I think it's going to be soon, either today or tomorrow, as soon as we solve the peering issues. Besides that, I think the next course of action is having this finalizing actually first. Second, as you said, implementing syncing, and then I'll make the changes to the Python spec after those two things are done, and then we'll just move on from that. I'm sure that that's already going to cover the next 2 weeks. All right. If there are no more comments, this is closing on 1, closing on 2, and closing on 3. Thanks, guys. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Bye.
Let's go back to the debugging thread.
Yeah. Have good luck. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.